Improvising guitar solos can seem really difficult if you've never ventured into that territory before. But getting started with it is much easier than you might think. So in this lesson, I'll show you what you actually need to get started with soloing. All right, first things first. So to start soloing, the first thing that you're gonna need is a scale. And typically, the most common scale used for soloing, arguably the most popular scale, is the minor pentatonic scale. So we're gonna teach this to you in the key of A. So we're gonna look at the A minor pentatonic scale here. It starts on the 5th fret of the low E string, and this is what the pattern looks like. Now what I just played is what we like to call the G pattern pentatonic scale. So not to be confused with the fact that we have played it in A minor, that's the tonality of it, but we call this the G pattern simply because the actual layout of the scale pattern resembles the form of the open G chord, right here in the open position. If we were to make it a movable shape, it actually covers perfectly what we play in the minor pentatonic. So it's the G pattern, but we're playing it in A minor. So take a second to really think that through and differentiate between the two. Our tonality is A minor, but the actual physical shape of the scale resembles the G chord, therefore it's called the G pattern. Now that we have this pattern to work with, which is chock full of great notes that we can use when we're soloing, we want to start with the bare necessities. So the most essential note that we're going to start with is the root note, basically the note that signifies the tonality that we're playing in. So in this case here, if we're playing in A minor, the root note is going to be A. And in this G pattern that we just played, there's actually 3 A or root notes contained within, and they're right here. 5th fret of low E, 7th fret of D, then 5th fret of high E. And you can hear that, A, A. It's just A in 3 different octaves. Now another thing about these root notes is the fact that they're laid out specifically here within the G pattern, how it tells us that we're playing in A minor, we want to think of these as minor root notes. So just commit that to memory when you're playing the A minor pentatonic scale. The root notes, you can consider them minor root notes, and that'll make more sense here in a little bit. But most particularly, the root note on the low E string, right here, the 5th fret, that especially is what we're gonna consider our minor root note. And that's gonna come in handy when we actually change this pattern to a different tonality, which, like I said, we'll get into in a second. What I'm gonna do now is a quick demonstration of how well this scale works when you're soloing. We're gonna be playing over a slow blues backing track, so it'll give us lots of time to think, and I'm really just gonna walk through the scale and just show you that the notes work pretty much anywhere you put them. It helps to really emphasize those root notes. So that was just to demonstrate that it works, right? The scale has a proof of concept and we can actually use it over a backing track like that. And one thing I strongly recommend you do is when you're practicing this scale and trying to get a feel for it, rather than just walking it up and down nonstop mechanically, just Energizer Bunny style, I want you to practice something that we like to call wandering. Now wandering is literally just playing random notes contained within the scale. It doesn't matter what order you play them in. I mean, of course, you'll have the root notes there and you can emphasize those to just kind of keep things centered. But this would be a way to prevent you from building the habit of just mechanically walking up and down the scale, which doesn't really do anything musically, it's just exercising a scale. But you also might stumble on some ideas or some note combinations that you otherwise wouldn't have, and you might be like, oh, that was cool. I'm gonna remember that and develop and work on that later to actually create some cool sounding lick. And I really mean just randomly walking through it, doing stuff like, I mean like that. Just try that, freestyle or over a backing track. And again, the notes are gonna work because you're right within the safety net of the actual scale. Oh, and by the way, if you're getting value out of this lesson, do me a favor, hit that like button and consider subscribing to our channel if you haven't already. I want to make sure you stay up to date with all the new lessons we got coming out, and boy, do we have a lot. So I thank you in advance, and let's get back to it. Now what we're gonna do is get more bang for our buck by taking the same pattern and adjusting it to a major tonality. So we've been working with A minor pentatonic. Remember how I talked about the minor root notes, right? Signifying that we're in A minor. We're actually now going to change to the major root note, and all we have to do for that is taking the minor root note, right? Remember how I said the 5th fret on the low E string, that's the one we really want to focus on. Now what we're gonna do is change the finger that we're fretting this with from our 1st finger to our 4th finger, our pinky. And now that we're in this position, what we're gonna do is fill out that same G pattern, the same pattern that we just did. We're now gonna fill it out right here, starting with our pinky on the 5th fret of the low E string. So now this turns into a major root note. And by virtue of that, we can actually find the A major pentatonic scale, and it sounds like this. See how we just played the same exact finger pattern? We just essentially conveyor belted it down 3 frets, I think, right? 1, 2, 3. But you know, the big jump was adjusting which finger we're playing that root note with. Because when we went from our 1st finger to our 4th finger, it went from a minor root note to a major root note. Just again, to help tell you that what we're doing now is we're playing a major pentatonic scale using the same G pattern. And in this one, we have 3 root notes right here, 5th fret on low E, same as before, 2nd fret on the G string, and 5th fret on high E, same as before. Those are still A notes, root notes, but now they're in the major context, so we can call them major root notes. And now what I'll do is I'll walk through this scale over that same backing track to show you how well it works. There's something interesting about playing the major pentatonic over that same backing track. Now, it was tonically correct, but it didn't really have a bluesy vibe. It just kind of took the blues out and just seemed to be a little too happy sounding. And if you thought the same thing, that's great. That's you exercising your ear to help determine what actually works for what style you're playing. Now, does that mean we gotta throw out the A major pentatonic scale? Absolutely not. What we need to do is find what I consider the golden ratio between using major and minor pentatonics, particularly over a blues. And the golden ratio that I like to follow when playing the blues is like 70–80% minor pentatonic and 30 to 20% major pentatonic. So it's mostly minor pentatonic to keep that bluesy vibe, but on the occasion you can throw in that major tonality and it actually gives it a cool gospel kind of spiritual sound. Nothing fancy, just kind of playing simple phrases. There's our major. Back to minor. Remember, this is a slow blues, so be slow with it. It's okay. Like, don't put too much pressure on yourself. Don't, I know this is exciting getting into the realm of soloing and improvising, but don't get overzealous. Just stick to where you're at and just move at a pace that's comfortable, but still allows you to create some interesting phrases. They don't have to be flashy in order to do that. And try to stick to that golden ratio I was talking about, to where you're pretty much playing mostly minor pentatonic with some major pentatonic thrown in. And again, because it's a slow blues, just give yourself time to think and plan your next move. So if you want to play a quick minor pentatonic phrase, then pause, and then move on down to the major pattern, right? And then play a major phrase and then move your way back up. So, you know, while you're still getting used to transitioning between the two patterns, you can give yourself time and still make it work and totally fit the vibe. Now that we have two, count them, two scale patterns to work with, the minor pentatonic, right, that's signaled with the minor root note, and the major pentatonic, signaled with the major root note, we got more than enough to work with here. It's like chock full of notes, and we can come up with all kinds of different phrases, even if we're just wandering through the notes and the scales in the beginning just to get comfortable with it. But we're gonna add a little something something to these patterns to spice it up even more. This is something we like to call the G plus 3. So for example, you take the G pattern, let's say minor pentatonic scale, that essentially ends right here. We're actually gonna add 3 additional notes that make up this little shape right here. Those are our 3 notes, 1, 2, 3. And it's right here on the 9th fret of the G string and then the 10th fret on the B and high E string. Now, you don't have to play it like this. This is just me showing you where they're at. But essentially, those 3 additional notes will link together this cool little pentatonic box that we can use for additional expressive soloing. So what we have here is this pattern. But we have this little extra, you know, box of notes here that was made possible because of that addition of 3 notes, hence the G plus 3. But it's not just limited to the minor pentatonic. We can do the same with the major right here, right, where the pattern ends. And then we move up 2 frets, right, and we have these 3 notes. So it's 6th fret on the G string, 7th fret on B and high E. And now we have this additional box of notes for our major tonality. And it allows for, like, you know, expressive transition between, you know, like the G pattern into that plus 3 box with something like slides, you know? Doing something like that, then moving your way up. And what's cool about this, especially here, especially the plus 3 box with the major pentatonic, is that it's right now smack dab in the middle of the minor pentatonic G pattern. So what I love about this plus 3 box being right here is we can do something like this. You know, if I were to, let's say, play in major pentatonic, I can do something like that, and then once I'm here, now I can just continue on, but in minor tonality. And that's where you can really get creative with combining major and minor tonalities over a blues. You know, you can do something like very common major pentatonic lick, right? Which all I'm doing is I'm sliding up to that 6th fret on the G string, and then I'm going 5, 7 on the B string, and then 5 on the high E string is our root note. And then once I'm here, now I can now do minor tonality, and it sounds a little extra stanky, you know? What I was doing here, after I hit that root note there, I went 8, 5 on the B string, 7 on the G string, back to 5 on the B string, and then rolled my first finger up to the 5th fret of the G string with a slight blues bend, which is just a very slight, like not a half step bend, it's more of like a quarter step bend. It's just enough bending of the pitch of the string to give it that stanky blues sound, you know? So it's just a great way to combine major and minor tonalities in a way that's smooth. And I want you to, you know, as you're, you know, working your way up to being able to smoothly transition between the patterns, just really, you know, spend some time wandering through the full G pattern and the plus 3 box, and then see how you can weave together the major and minor tonalities by virtue, especially of right here, them essentially being on top of each other. Now, if you're feeling overwhelmed with the information that we're going over so far, it's totally okay. What I recommend that you do is when you're approaching these, you know, big old G patterns, you can start working at it one chunk at a time. One thing I like to do is if, let's say I'm playing a G pattern, minor pentatonic, you know, I kind of break it up into 3 chunks. So this first 4 notes, right? The next 4 notes, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then the last 4 notes, 1, 2, 3, 4. And I just kind of work at them one chunk at a time. Same thing with major pentatonic. And the same thing with the plus 3 pattern, you know. You can just like, again, take it one chunk at a time, and let's say you want to focus on like what we were just talking about, where you want to do just the chunk of the +3 of major pentatonic. But then you combine that with the like last chunk of the minor pentatonic. And then you can just kind of work your way through each little chunk of the scale. So it's not like you're just, again, walking through it up and down mechanically. You don't want to do that. Now I'm going to throw on that backing track one last time and show you how we can use everything we've just learned for soloing. And I'm going to approach it just one chunk at a time, keep it real simple, nothing flashy, not going to go for playing too fast or anything like that. But what I am going to do is apply some guitar linguistics. So some slides, vibratos, bends, that kind of thing to make it, you know, expressive. And speaking of fun, with everything that we have learned in this lesson, you're actually primed and ready to take it to the next level. Oh yes, remember how we covered all this stuff in just one key? Well, imagine if we were able to take what we've learned and apply it to all the keys. Well, I happen to have ready for you the very next lesson that you're gonna take that's gonna get you there. And it's this guy right here. It's a free guide on how to instantly solo in any key. First thing you're gonna learn in record time is how to find every single key on your fretboard. And the next thing you're gonna learn is how to solo in those keys, both major and minor. So when you take what you've learned in this lesson and then someone's like, oh yeah, why don't you play it in B flat? You'll be like, psh, no problem. So to get cracking on this lesson, you gotta click here to claim your free copy of it, or check the link in the description box. Even if this lesson was your very first step in soloing on guitar, you're already miles ahead of where I was when I was first trying to get into it. In fact, if I had the opportunity to go back in time and teach my younger self the one lesson to get started with soloing, it'd be this one.